Hello, Algebra students, and good afternoon. Today we're going to be covering the Unit 2 review. So go ahead and go to the back of the packet of Unit 2, and we'll be going over the review right now. And basically everything I write, you should write down, and everything I tell you to write, you should write down, okay? If you follow along well, you should be able to do very well in this review. So let me go ahead and share my screen here, and we'll go over it. So the review starts on page 67. And let's go ahead and read this first question here. Raquel got 4 out of 5 questions correct on her English quiz and is convinced that this equates to a score of 90%. Show Raquel that percentage 4 out of 5 actually equals, being sure to use cross product to prove your answer. So Raquel got 4 out of 5. We want to know what is that as a percentage. So a percentage is out of 100. Percent, cent means 100, right? Like there's 100 cents in a dollar, or there's 100 years in a century. So when you hear percent, that means out of 100. So it should always be out of 100 when we're doing our percentage. Now we want to use a cross product. In this case is what they want us to do. So if we go ahead and use a cross product when we're trying to find x here, we can find x in this proportion, and that'll tell us Raquel's percentage. So how do we solve for x here? Well, one way we can do is cross multiplying. It says use cross products, right? So when you have a proportion like this, meaning two fractions equal to each other like this, you can cross multiply to find the value of a missing part of it. So in this case, 5 times x, that's 5x, equals, and then cross product the other way, 4 times 100, that's 400. Now to solve for x, what we do is divide by 5 on both sides of the equation, and that'll give us x by itself over here. And then 400 divided by 5 is 80. So that means that Raquel got 80% on her test. So I want you to go ahead and finish that by writing in a sentence that since Raquel got 4 out of 5 questions on her test, that's equal to an 80% on the test, a score of 80%. Okay, question 2. Anna found a cookie recipe that requires 1/2 cup of coconut oil to be used instead of butter. The recipe makes a total of 100 cookies. The problem is that Anna only wants to make 25 cookies. Explain to Anna how much coconut oil she will need to use in an adjusted recipe to make 25 cookies instead of 100. So 1/2 of, basically we're going to be similar to the last one. We're going to be using a proportion. So 1/2 of a cup makes 100 cookies. Now, when I set up my next fraction, notice this is oil, right? Cups of oil. And then in the denominator is cookies. So make sure I want to set up the next fraction the same way, where it'll be how much oil and then over the desired amount of cookies. So in our case, she only wants to make 25 cookies. So that 25 would go on bottom because this 100 cookies was on bottom. So you'll put cookies on bottom, okay? The amount of oil needed, we don't know that yet. So we're going to go and put x. Now, very similarly to what we did in the last problem, we can use cross multiplication to figure out our answer. So let's go ahead and cross multiply. 1/2 times 25. So 1/2 times 25 is, well, you can go ahead and use a calculator if you want. And basically to find half of a number, you just divide it by 2. So 25 divided by 2, that's 12.5. Or in other words, 12.5. But we'll put 12.5. So we want 12.5. That's what that equals. Equals 100x. So now to solve for x, to get x by itself, we're going to divide both sides by 100. So since 100 is multiplied by x, you divide by that same thing in order to cancel it. Divide by 100 on the other side as well, because in an equation, in order to keep it equal, whatever you do on one side, you always do the exact same thing on the other. So if I divide by 100 on the right, I have to divide by 100 on the left. So when I do this 12.5 divided by 100, that gives me 0.125. Okay. Now on the test, they might show you all the answers in fractions. This fraction is actually 1/8. So we need 1/8 of a cup of oil. Okay. So I want you to put that in a complete sentence. We would need 1/8, or Anna would need 1/8 of a cup of oil in order to make 25 cookies. Now, what about when you're on the test and you're not sure which fraction is going to equal the decimal that you get? Well, you could always put the fraction in the calculator and see if it gives you the correct decimal. So 1/8, you would do 1 divided by 8. And if you punch that in your calculator, hopefully you'll be able to see that gives you 0.125. Okay, so you could always change those answer choices that are in fraction form. You could always change them into decimal form by just dividing, right? In the case of 1/8, you just do 1 divided by 8. It's always the numerator divided by the denominator, okay? And that changes it to a decimal. But make sure you answer this complete sentence, and let's move on. The state of California charges homeowners approximately $1,200 per year in property taxes for every $100,000 a person's home is worth. If Mr. Cohen's home in Studio City, California is worth $1,600,000, how much does he have to pay in property taxes per year? Set up a pair of equivalent ratios and then use your knowledge of cross products to solve. You may use a calculator. By the way, in my opinion, for the rest of this class, you should be able to use a calculator. So if you have a calculator, feel free to use it. But let's go ahead and see the proportion we're trying to make here. So you would have to pay $1,200 in taxes for every $100,000 that your home is worth. Okay, so notice this ratio that we're putting here is taxes over the house property. Taxes over the house property. So when you set up your second fraction in order to complete the proportion, the second fraction should also have the taxes over the property worth. So in this case, Mr. Cohen's home is worth $1,600,000. Would that go on top or on bottom? Well, hopefully you see that the worth of the home goes on bottom. Okay, and we do not know how much taxes, right? It says how much do we pay in taxes? So this is the unknown thing that we're trying to find. Similarly, with other problems we've done, if we are trying to find a missing value in a proportion, we can cross multiply, use the cross product, right? Cross product, right? That means cross multiply. So 100,000 times X, that's 100,000X equals, and then cross multiply the other way, 1,200 times 1,600,000. That gives us 1920, and then 6 more zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Should be 7 zeros in total there. Then, in order to get X by itself, we divide by this 100,000. Divide by 100,000 here. So X equals, by the way, a little trick when you're dividing, you can cancel out zeros at the ends, right? So there's 5 zeros, 5 zeros here. I can cancel with 5 of these zeros here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that leaves us with 19200. So he can expect to pay $19,200 per year in property tax. Okay, so go ahead and finish that up by answering in a complete sentence. Mr. Cohen can expect to pay $19,200 each year in property tax. Now we want to divide these. So again, kind of like how I set up here, if you have zeros, you can cancel those, right? So 1,000 divided by 10, I can cancel out one of those zeros. So that's just 100. Okay. And when you're dividing with powers, as long as you have the same base, notice the both base 10, you could go and subtract those powers. So 3 minus 1, that gives you 2, right? These are actually the same problem, right? 10 to the power of 3 is 1,000. 10 to the power of 1 is 10. And if you divide those, you get 10 to the power of 2, which is 100. When you're multiplying things with a bunch of zeros, one thing you could do is just multiply the front numbers. So 1 times 1, well, that's 1. And then add all the zeros at the end. So you'd have a total of 6, 12 zeros. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. When you're multiplying, when you're multiplying things like this, as long as you have the same base, you could just add the powers, right? So that's the same as 10 to the power of 12, which is the same thing as this. These are both the same problem. Here we have 256.8 times 10 to the power of 6. Now notice the difference between the one here and the one here. They move the decimal over 2 times. So that's going to add 2 more to our power. So that's going to make it to the 8th power. You could always try in the calculator and make sure that it's accurate, right? If you do 256.8 times 10 to the power of 6 in your calculator, you should get the same answer as if you did 2.568 times 10 to the 8th power. So you might want to check that on your calculator just so you get the hang of using it. Convert each of the following numbers into a fraction and write them in order from least to greatest in the line below. So whenever you see a negative power, you could think of that as 1 over the positive power of that, okay? So 5 to the power of negative 2 is the same as saying 1 over 5 to the power of 2. Same thing here. This would be 1 over 10 to the power of 2. By the way, to the power of 2, most people don't say that. They just say squared. So you could read this as 1 over 10 squared. What would be this one if you wrote it as a fraction? Well, this would be 1 over 20 squared. Let's go ahead and change each of those. So 1 over 5 squared. Well, what does 5 squared mean? That means 5 times itself, 5 times 5. So this would be 1 over 25. So this first fraction is 1 over 25. The second fraction is 1 over, what's 10 squared? Don't say 20, it's 100, right? It means 10 times 10. This one, 1 over 20 times 20 is 400. Now it says, put these fractions in order from least to greatest. So we want the lowest one, the smallest one first. Well, which one's the smallest one? Well, it's actually the 1 over 400. This is the smallest one. Okay. Now, a lot of people make the mistake and they put this as the biggest one. This is actually the smallest one. Think about it this way. Imagine a pizza. Would you rather have a pizza where you get 1 slice and it's cut into 400 slices? Well, those slices would be very small and you only get 1 of them. And you'd get this is a very small slice, right? 1 slice, when it's cut into 400, that's a very small slice. But if you take that same pizza and you cut into only 100 and you get a slice, well, that's still a very small slice, but it's a heck of a lot bigger than that one. Right? So you get 1 slice. This pizza is cut into 100 pieces and you get 1. Well, that'll be a bigger piece than this one, right? Lastly, this is even bigger still, right? One way to just kind of think about fractions and how big they are is the bigger the denominator, generally the smaller the fraction is, right? You're getting it split into more pieces essentially there. Okay, next we're going to do this group here. So 10x plus 5x. Well, when they have the same variable here, you just add the coefficients. So 10 plus 5, that's 15x. So if I have 10 x's plus 5 more x's, that's a total of 15 x's. When you're multiplying, you multiply the coefficients. So 10 times 5, that's 50. And then you do the x times the x, that makes x squared, right? Remember, this will give you x times x, which is the same as saying x squared. Now this thing with the power of 3 out here, that means everything in the parentheses will get this power. So first, what's 3 to the power of 3? So this becomes 3 to the power of 3. Now what about the x? Well, when you get a power to a power, you multiply those powers. So that's going to be x to the power of 6. And this will be y to the power of 3. A power to a power, you multiply those. So that's 3. Y to the power of 9. So 3 to the power of 3, that's 27, right? Remember, that's 3 times 3 times 3. So that's 27. And then x to the power of 6, y to the power of 9. Why don't you go ahead and try this one on your own? So follow the rules and the explanation we did for this one here and try this one on your own. For this one down here, I'll notice first that there's a x to the power of -2. Now, whenever I see negative powers in this fraction like this, I always like to move them first and then deal with it later. So if it has a negative power, that means it needs to move where it's at. So a negative power on top is going to come down here. If it was a negative power down here, it would come up. So I could rewrite this as y to the power of 3 over x to the power of 7. See how I got that? Because these two come down here, right? And when you move the negative power, it becomes a positive power. So these x to the power of -2 comes down here, becomes x to the power of +2. And then we have this x to the power of 5. That's 7, x to the power of 7 there. Then we have y to the power of 6. Okay. Now, we can cancel out these y's here. When you have it in a fraction, go ahead and subtract those. And you're going to be left, when they cancel each other, you're going to be left with 3 of them left over in the denominator. So our denominator now is x to the power of 7, y to the power of 3. Because the 3 up here cancel with 3 of the ones from down here. And if everything cancels on top, you just put a 1. For this last one, a power to a power, we can multiply those. So that would be x to the power of 2 times -2. That's -4. Remember, a positive times a negative is negative. Then y to the power of -10. Since they're both of negative power, we can put them in the denominator, become of positive power. Okay, and that's it. That's the last one. All right. So I hope that